The night New York burned, it wasn't because of aliens, terrorists, or some foreign enemy Vought could package into a press release. It began with a scream that didn't come from any throat, a sound like steel dragged across bone, echoing through 7th Avenue as reality itself split open. Traffic lights exploded, windows spiderwebbed, the air smelled of sulfur and scorched asphalt. Above the city, clouds churned into a spiral that didn't obey weather or physics, glowing faintly orange as if hell itself had leaned close to listen. Pedestrians ran, cameras rolled. Somewhere, a Vought social media team was already scrambling, fingers flying as they searched for a headline that could soften what no one understood yet. Then, the fire arrived. It poured out of the rift in the air like a living thing, slamming into the street and igniting a circle of hellfire that refused to spread beyond its boundary, as if deliberately contained. From within it rose a motorcycle, metal blackened, wheels burning without melting, engine roaring with a sound too deep to be mechanical. The rider lifted his head, and there was no face beneath the helmet, only a skull wreathed in flame, eyes glowing with ancient, merciless purpose. Johnny Blaze didn't know where he was. He only knew why he had come. If you want to see more characters enter dark, dangerous universes like this, hit that subscribe button and drop a character name in the comments. May the Force be with you. Across the street, the staged rescue was already in progress. A low-level soup, one of Vought's cheaper assets, was pretending to evacuate civilians from a gas leak, while hidden cameras captured heroic angles. The plan fell apart the moment the flames appeared. The soup froze, bravado evaporating as his enhanced senses screamed that this was not part of the script. Johnny felt the weight of the city pressing in on him. Not fear, he'd burned fear out of himself long ago, but guilt. It hung over New York like smog, thick and layered. Millions of small sins, thousands of heavy ones, and a handful so black they screamed for judgment. The spirit of vengeance stirred. His boots hit the pavement, and the hellfire circle collapsed inward, leaving scorched concrete etched with symbols no one recognized. People filmed anyway, they always filmed. Johnny turned slowly, chains coiling at his sides like restless serpents, his skull reflecting in a dozen phone screens. He could feel eyes on him from blocks away, satellites, drones, soups with telescopic vision. A corporate god was watching. The first scream came from behind him. The soup, Compound V still glowing faintly in his veins, charged, fists crackling with cheap energy. "Hey," he shouted, forcing confidence into his voice. "You're interfering with a Vought operation." Johnny didn't turn. The chains snapped out, wrapping around the soup's arm before he could throw a punch. Hellfire raced along the links, not burning flesh, but igniting something deeper. The man collapsed mid-sentence, memories flooding his mind, bribes taken, a woman silenced, a child left bleeding in an alley while cameras were turned off. The penance stare wasn't even necessary. He sobbed as the fire consumed him from the inside out, leaving nothing but ash, and a scorched Vought logo melted into the pavement.
The crowd went silent. Miles above, Homelander hovered, red cape snapping in the turbulent air. He'd felt it too, the rupture, the wrongness. New York was his city, Vaught's city, and someone had just rewritten the rules without asking permission. His eyes narrowed as he focused on the flaming skull below, scanning for weaknesses, heartbeats, lies. Nothing made sense. Johnny finally looked up, meeting Homelander's gaze through layers of atmosphere and ego. For a moment, something unfamiliar flickered in the world's greatest hero. Not fear. Homelander didn't know fear the way humans did, but uncertainty. The thing on the street wasn't impressed, wasn't awed, wasn't even angry at him yet. Homelander descended in a sonic boom, cracking the street as he landed between Johnny and the crowd. Cameras caught the tableau instantly. America's shining savior facing a demon straight out of a nightmare. Somewhere, ratings spiked. "All right," Homelander said, smiling for the cameras, jaw tight. "This is where you stop. You're scaring people." Johnny's voice came out like gravel soaked in fire. "They should be scared." Heat rolled outward as the spirit of vengeance rose closer to the surface. Johnny could feel it urging him, whispering names, pointing towards souls that burned brighter with guilt. This world was different, loud, shallow, drowning in spectacle, but sin tasted the same everywhere. Homelander's smile twitched. "You don't get to judge anyone here." The chain rattled as Johnny lifted it, flames intensifying. "I already have." Elsewhere, deep beneath Vought Tower, Stan Edgar watched the feed without blinking. The sensors told him nothing useful. No radiation profile, no compound V markers, no known energy signature. Just fire that behaved like intent. He steepled his fingers. "Classify the entity," Edgar said, calmly. "Black-level threat. Initiate panic protocol." Analysts scrambled. Occult consultants, normally a punchline, were rushed in under NDAs thicker than Bibles. Somewhere, in a locked drawer, a file marked Temp V Unauthorized Applications was opened for the first time. Back on the street, Butcher watched from a stolen van, jaw clenched around an unlit cigarette. Huey stared at the screen, pale. That's not a soup, is it?" "No," Butcher muttered, eyes fixed on the flaming skull facing down the most dangerous man on the planet. "That's something worse." The confrontation hadn't turned violent yet, but the city felt like it was holding its breath. Johnny could sense Homelander's sins, less regret than rage, a hollow core screaming to be worshipped. The penance stare would work, it always did, but unleashing it here, now, would burn through more than one soul. Innocence would get caught in the backlash. For the first time since arriving, Johnny hesitated. That hesitation was a choice, a deliberate restraint. The spirit howled in protest, but Johnny held it back, flames dimming just enough for Homelander to notice. The world had rules here, ugly ones, corporate ones, and if Johnny was going to pass judgment, he needed to understand the system before he burned it down. Homelander leaned in, voice dropping low, cameras still rolling. "You don't belong here," he said, "and I always take care of things that don't belong." Johnny revved the bike. Hellfire flared, reflecting in Homelander's eyes like a prophecy he didn't like. "I go where I'm needed, and this place is drowning." Sirens wailed in the distance, drones repositioned. Somewhere, a deal was already being drafted with the devil, if only Vought could figure out which one had just arrived. The Ghost Rider mounted his bike and roared past Homelander in a blur of flame, leaving a burning tire mark straight through the heart of the city. Judgment had come to the boys' universe. It just hadn't finished deciding who deserved it.
The fire didn't fade when Ghost Rider vanished into the city. It lingered, burning in reflections, in scorched pavement, in the tight silence that followed him like an afterimage. News helicopters circled. Vaught's emergency broadcast cut in within 90 seconds, anchors smiling too hard as they reassured America that the situation was under control. Homelander hovered above the street long after the rider was gone, fists clenched, cape twitching in the heat. The cameras loved the shot, him framed against the night sky, protector of the people. But inside, something gnawed at him. That thing hadn't flinched, hadn't begged, hadn't even cared that he was Homelander. That wasn't supposed to happen. He shot forward, sonic boom cracking windows as he tracked the scorched trail slicing through the city like a wound. Infrared showed nothing useful. No heartbeat, no metabolic heat, just fire that burned without consuming fuel. Homelander snarled, accelerating, ego demanding a confrontation he could dominate. Johnny Blaze rode through midtown traffic like it wasn't there. Cars swerved instinctively, drivers screaming as hellfire licked their doors without leaving a scratch. He could feel eyes on him, Homelander closing fast. But he wasn't running, he was hunting. The spirit of vengeance pulled him toward a cluster of sins stacked high in a glass tower 3 blocks ahead. Inside the tower, a mid-tier Vought executive was celebrating. Champagne, escorts, laughter too loud. His hands still trembled from the meeting earlier that day, the one where he'd signed off on suppressing a report about a soup who'd lost control and slaughtered a family in Queens. The payout had been generous, the silence airtight. The elevator exploded upward through the roof. Johnny stepped out into the penthouse, flames reflecting off marble and gold. Music cut off mid-beat. Screams followed. The escorts ran. The executive stumbled back, mouth opening to bargain, threaten, lie. He never got the chance. The penance stare locked on him like a verdict. Johnny's flaming eyes burned into his man's soul, forcing him to relive every decision he'd buried under bonuses and PR spin, every death, every ruined life. The scream that tore out of him wasn't loud, it was hollow. When it ended, only ash remained, drifting down onto a pristine white couch. Johnny turned as the wall behind him exploded inward. Homelander burst through, red eyes blazing, grin gone. "That one was under my protection," he said, voice shaking with something dangerously close to rage. Johnny faced him, chain sliding into his hand. "Then you share his guilt." The temperature spiked. Homelander lasered the chain, expecting it to melt. It didn't. The beam bent, refracted by hellfire, carving a glowing scar across the ceiling instead. For the first time, Homelander took a step back. "You think you scare me?" he spat, surging forward, fists hitting like artillery. The impact sent Johnny skidding through a wall, out onto the rooftop. Concrete shattered, fire roared. Johnny absorbed the blow, bones screaming, but not breaking. He hadn't lost power. He'd chosen not to unleash it fully. Not yet. They clashed above the city, shockwaves rippling outward. Homelander was stronger, brute force fueled by ego and compound V. Johnny was relentless, pain meaningless, purpose absolute. Each hit carried intent, not strategy. Homelander tried to dominate. Johnny tried to judge. Below, people watched from streets and screens. America's hero locked in combat with a demon. Vought's feeds lagged, then cut. Stan Edgar didn't need visuals to understand the implications. "This is not a branding problem," Edgar said quietly, standing in the Situation Room. "This is an extinction-level variable." Scientists argued, generals postured. An occult consultant, brought in as a joke, was now white-faced and shaking. "He's not a soup," the man whispered. "He's enforcement." Enforcement answers to someone. Find out who. The fight escalated. Homelander drove Johnny into a water tower, ripping it free and hurling it like a missile. Johnny crashed through it, steam and flame mixing into a blinding cloud. Homelander charged, screaming, punching through the smoke, and stopped dead. Johnny stood there, flames roaring higher now, restraint cracking. The spirit surged, furious at being held back. Johnny grabbed Homelander by the throat, lifting him effortlessly. For a split second, Homelander saw it. Every face he'd ever terrified, every life he'd treated as disposable. The weight of it pressed in, unbearable. "No!" Homelander hissed, eyes darting, panic finally surfacing. "You don't get to—" Johnny released him. Homelander fell back, gasping, stunned, not by pain, but by mercy he hadn't earned. Johnny turned away, mounting his bike as if the world's strongest soup were nothing more than a distraction. "That's it?" Homelander shouted, humiliation boiling over. You run?" Johnny looked back once. "You're not ready." He vanished in a blaze of hellfire, leaving Homelander hovering alone above the city, shaking with rage and something worse, dread. Elsewhere, the boys regrouped in their hideout, footage replaying on a cracked monitor. Frenchie was pacing, muttering prayers he half remembered. Kimiko watched silently, eyes reflecting flame. Huey swallowed hard. He let him live. Why? Butcher exhaled smoke, eyes narrowed. Because he's not done. The city didn't sleep that night. Soups locked their doors, VOD executives canceled flights. Underground forums lit up with whispers of judgment and hellfire. And Johnny rode on, pulled deeper into a world where heroes were brands, villains were assets, and justice had been outsourced to marketing departments. He felt the weight of it pressing harder now. This wasn't a place that could be fixed with fire alone. Too many innocents trapped beneath the rot, too many systems built to survive punishment. For the first time in a long while, the spirit of vengeance faced a challenge it couldn't simply burn away. And somewhere in the dark, men were already planning how to kill a devil.
By morning, the word demon was trending higher than Homelander. Vaughn tried to get ahead of it. They always did. Morning shows rolled footage on a loop, carefully edited angles, slowed frames, captions suggesting terrorist, unknown hostile, foreign threat. Psychologists were wheeled out to reassure viewers that fear was normal, that America was safe, that soups were still in control. None of it landed. Because hellfire didn't behave like terrorism. It didn't demand attention. It didn't make statements. It arrived, judged, and moved on. And worst of all, it didn't touch the innocent. People noticed. Johnny Blaze rode through Brooklyn as the sun rose, flames dimmed to embers beneath the daylight. He felt the city differently now, less like a roar, more like a pulse. The spirit guided him in flashes, a warehouse by the river, a basement club beneath a shuttered church, a brownstone where screams had been soundproofed for years. He ignored half of them. That restraint was costing him. Hellfire flickered unevenly, power straining against will. The spirit didn't understand systems or collateral nuance. It understood guilt. Johnny did the math instead. Burn everything and the innocents suffer. Burn selectively and the rot adapts. Behind him, something followed. Not Homelander this time. Quieter, smarter. In a nondescript van 3 blocks back, Mother's Milk watched heat signatures ripple across a stolen tablet. "He's slowing," MM said, "like he's thinking." Butcher snorted. Bloody hell, first time for everything. They'd been tracking the rider since dawn, far enough to stay alive, close enough to learn. Frenchie had rigged sensors scavenged from Vaught trash, tuned to whatever unholy frequency Johnny gave off. Kimiko rode shotgun, silent, alert. "He doesn't kill like they do," Huey said softly. "Not random, not sloppy. Doesn't mean he's our friend, means he's got rules. Devils always do." Johnny turned down an alley without looking back. The van stalled. Frenchie swore. Engine just died. The air thickened. Heat crawled across the hood like a living thing. Johnny stood at the alley's end, bike idling, skull half hidden in shadow. The flames around his head flared, not aggressive, but alert. "You've been following me," he said. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Butcher stepped out first, gun raised on reflex before he realized how useless it was. "Yeah, figured you might notice." Johnny turned fully now, eyes locking onto each of them in turn. He saw their sins too, lighter than most, but heavier than they pretended. Rage, regret, survival-driven cruelty, but also something rare in this world, refusal to look away. "You hunt monsters," Johnny said. "Something like that. Difference is, we don't pretend it's holy." The spirit stirred, curious.
Before Johnny could respond, the alley detonated in sound and pressure. A concussive blast hurled Butcher into a dumpster, slammed into the van, sent Huey sprawling. Kimiko rolled with it, already moving. A soup dropped from above, sleek, tactical, Vought-issued armor humming with Temp V enhancement. 2 more followed, then 4. Black Ops, not for cameras. Johnny felt it immediately. Not guilt, these men were clean enough, but intent. Vought had decided, capture if possible, study, replicate, weaponize. The first soup charged, electrified baton cracking against Johnny's chest. Hellfire flared in response, shorting the weapon instantly. Johnny handbacked him through a brick wall, restraint thinning. The second tried sonic disruption. The third fired a containment net laced with experimental alloys. For a moment, just a moment, the hellfire sputtered as incompatible tech strained against something ancient. Johnny dropped to one knee. Not weakness, interference. Vought had guessed right. Not everything from hell translated cleanly into this universe. The spirit compensated, drawing deeper, but deeper meant less control. Homelander hovered above the rooftops, watching, waiting. He didn't intervene, not yet. Let them soften it up, let it bleed. Kimiko leapt, tearing through one soup with brutal efficiency. Fired, buying seconds. Butcher scrambled to his feet, eyes wide as he realized the rider was actually pinned. "Oi, Flamin' Skull, you planning to get up or should we start praying?" Johnny roared as the spirit surged. The chains exploded outward, shattering the net, wrapping around 3 soups at once. Hellfire ignited, not judgmental, not targeted, raw, defensive. 2 men dropped screaming. 1 survived, burned, but breathing.
Johnny froze. He hadn't meant to do that. The spirit recoiled, confused by the hesitation. Pain rippled through Johnny's form, flames dimming to a dangerous low. He'd crossed his own line, lost control, if only for a second. That was when Homelander descended. He landed amid the chaos like a god reclaiming a battlefield. "See?" he said loudly, for anyone recording. "This is what happens when you let monsters roam free." Johnny stood slowly, fire rekindling. "You sent them." Homelander smiled. "I protected my city." The penance stare beckoned, stronger now. Johnny could end it, right here. One look, one judgment, the system's god exposed as hollow. But the alley was full of people who'd pay the price for that release. Johnny turned away. Homelander's smile cracked. The rider mounted his bike, flames flaring just enough to force distance. "You're not the worst thing here, just the loudest." He vanished down the street in a trail of fire and ash. Silence followed. Homelander hovered, fists shaking. He hadn't won, he hadn't lost, but he'd been dismissed. Again. Back in the alley, Butcher stared at the scorched ground. "Well," he muttered, "that complicates things." Nodded. "Vought knows how to hurt him." "And he knows it," Huey added. "That's new." Kimiko looked down the street where the fire had gone, eyes unreadable. Somewhere deep beneath Vought Tower, Stan Edgar listened to reports without emotion. A variable had revealed limits. Limits could be exploited. "Escalate," Edgar said calmly. "If Hell wants jurisdiction, we'll negotiate from a position of leverage." Johnny rode on, pain smoldering beneath his flames. This world resisted judgment, fought back with contracts and chemicals and cameras. For the first time since becoming the Ghost Rider, he wondered if vengeance alone was enough. In Hell, listening closely now, wondered the same. By the 4th night, the city had learned new habits. People avoided dark alleys not because of crime, but because of fire. Soups stopped prowling solo. Vought quietly reassigned patrols, rerouted heroes away from neighborhoods where guilt ran thick. Officially, it was risk management. Unofficially, it was fear. Johnny Blaze felt it every mile he rode. The spirit of vengeance was no longer pulling him at random. It was narrowing its focus, zeroing in on nodes, places where corruption wasn't just individual, but engineered. Boardrooms, labs, black sites. This world didn't worship demons, it manufactured them. That made judgment complicated. He stopped beneath an overpass in Queens, killing the engine. Flames dimmed to a low burn, enough to keep the darkness honest. Pain crept through him now, residual feedback from the containment tech, from holding the spirit back when it wanted release. Dimensional incompatibility, the whispers called it. This universe resisted hellfire the way scar tissue resisted knives. Johnny welcomed the pain. It kept him human. Above him, something moved. Not fast, not loud. Controlled. A woman dropped from the overpass, landing lightly despite the weight of military-grade armor. No cape, no branding, just a rifle on her back, and eyes that didn't flinch at the flames. "Name's Victoria Newman," she said calmly. "I'd shake your hand, but I get the feeling that wouldn't end well." Johnny didn't rise. "You shouldn't be here." Newman smiled thinly. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." She didn't attack, didn't signal backup. That alone made her dangerous. Johnny felt her guilt, present, layered, but buried under conviction. She believed in what she did. Belief was harder to burn than greed. "You're destabilizing the balance. Soups, Vought, the public. People need monsters they understand." Johnny's skull tilted. "You understand them?" "I manage them," she replied. "There's a difference." The spirit stirred, urging him to look deeper. Johnny resisted. He already knew what he'd find. Blood hidden behind policy, heads exploding behind closed doors, a self-appointed guardian playing God with cleaner hands than Homelander, but dirtier than she'd ever admit. "This world doesn't need you. It needs order." Johnny stood, chains rattling softly. "Order without justice is just cruelty with paperwork." Newman's smile faded. "You're not winning this. Vought is adapting. They've learned how to hurt you, how to slow you down." "I noticed." "And Homelander," she added, watching for a reaction, "he's not afraid of you anymore. He's angry. That's worse." Johnny stepped closer. Flames reflected in Newman's eyes, but she didn't back away. Brave, or confident in a power she hadn't revealed. "You're here to negotiate," Johnny said. "Yes," she admitted. "Stay away from certain assets, let us handle internal discipline. In return, we don't escalate." Johnny laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You don't discipline monsters, you monetize them." Newman sighed, as if disappointed. "Then you force our hand." She turned and walked away, unhurried, no threat, no promise, just inevitability. Moments later, the overpass lit up with motion. Drones, heavy ones, experimental, runes etched into their frames, crude, stolen approximations of hellish symbols. Vought had crossed a line. Johnny mounted the bike as the drones opened fire. Kinetic rounds, sonic bursts, containment fields overlapping. The first wave hit hard. Hellfire flared defensively, but each impact dragged at him, leaching energy. Not enough to stop him, but enough to matter. He roared forward, chain whipping through the air, tearing drones apart in showers of sparks and flame. One detonated too close, the shockwave slamming him into a concrete pillar. Johnny felt something crack, not bone, but control. The spirit surged. Flames exploded outward, uncontrolled, scorching the overpass, melting steel, igniting cars. Johnny forced it back, teeth clenched, skull blazing white-hot. Innocents were screaming. That mattered more than vengeance. He fled. The ride was agony. Every mile burned twice, once from injury, once from restraint. He vanished into the industrial outskirts, hiding among abandoned factories and rusted rail lines. That's where the boys found him again. Butcher approached alone this time, hands empty. "You look like hell," he said conversationally.
Johnny didn't respond. "They're gonna keep pushing," Butcher continued. "Tech, tricks, magic knockoffs. They don't need to beat you, just need to make you slip." Johnny turned, flames flaring weakly. "Why are you here?" Butcher shrugged. Because you scare the right people, and because you don't enjoy it. Silence stretched. You could burn the whole thing down, Butcher said quietly. End Vought, end Homelander, end all of it. Yes, Johnny agreed. But you won't, Butcher finished, because it'd take the city with it. Johnny met his gaze. What do you want? Butcher hesitated. That was new. Help, he said finally. Not to judge, not to rule, just to remind them they're not untouchable. The spirit stirred, not in hunger, but in recognition. A partnership wasn't redemption, it was compromise, messy, temporary, human. Johnny looked out over the city, flames reflecting in distant windows. The rot ran deep. He couldn't burn it all, but he could cauterize. Very well, Johnny said, but understand this. He leaned in, fire brightening. I don't work for you. Butcher smiled grimly. Wouldn't have it any other way. Far above, Homelander watched the city, listening to reports of drone failures and scorched infrastructure. His patience was gone. Fear had curdled into something sharper. If hell wanted to play politics, he'd show it what a god looked like when pushed.
The city didn't notice the alliance forming. That was the point. Johnny Blaze stayed in the margins now. Industrial zones, derelict rail yards, rooftops that never made the skyline. The flames dimmed unless needed. Hellfire coiled tight beneath his skin like a restrained storm. The spirit hated the leash. It wanted spectacle, judgment in broad daylight. Johnny ignored it. He was learning this world's rules the hard way. The boys brought him information. Not purity, never that, but patterns. Names buried 3 shell companies deep. Safe houses that didn't exist on maps. Supes who never appeared on billboards because their work was too dirty for branding. Johnny listened. Laid it out one night over a cracked table under flickering lights. Vought's running a cleanup division. Non-disclosure enforcement. Accidents that don't make the news. Frenchie slid a tablet across. Footage of a Supe laughing while burning a building to flush out a witness. Another clip, older, of a man begging before being silenced by a smiling hero. Johnny felt the pull immediately. Heavy, dense, the kind of guilt that left scars on the soul. This isn't random, Huey said. It's a machine. Johnny nodded. Machines can be dismantled. Their first move was surgical. A mid-tier Supe named Blackout Jack, thermal manipulation, unstable temperament, Vought loyal because Vought owned his secrets. He was scheduled for a training retreat in the Adirondacks, off-grid, no cameras, no witnesses. Johnny rode through the trees at dusk, fire reflecting off snow. The spirit surged as Jack stepped out of the lodge, already drunk, already cruel. The fight was brief. Jack threw heat like a tantrum. Johnny absorbed it, hellfire devouring flame like it was starving. The penance stare ended it. Jack collapsed, alive but broken, screaming apologies to ghosts that weren't listening. Johnny left him there, breathing, mind scarred beyond spin. Vought noticed. By morning, Stan Edgar had the report. He's not killing them all, an analyst said nervously. Some are surviving. Worse, Redger replied. Survivors talk. Vought changed tactics. No more lone assets. No more obvious sins. They paired Supes with handlers, lawyers, psychological dampeners, guilt mitigation protocols. They tried to launder souls the way they laundered money. It worked, briefly. Johnny felt it like static. Judgment blurred. The spirit pushed harder, demanding release, confused by half-sins and outsourced cruelty. Johnny felt the strain immediately. Holding back took more effort now. Each act of restraint drained him more than violence ever had. Homelander felt it too. He descended on a boys' operation in Harlem without warning, killing 2 informants in seconds, staring straight at the sky as if daring the rider to intervene. Johnny didn't move. Not yet. not with civilians nearby. Homelander smiled. The message was clear. I can still choose when people die. That night, Johnny almost lost control. He rode until the engines screamed, flames flickering erratically. Pain lanced through him, feedback from restraint layered over dimensional drag. The spirit howled, furious, accusing him of weakness. "You're not wrong," Johnny admitted aloud, "but you're not right either." He stopped at an abandoned church. Roof caved in, altar burned black long ago. Johnny knelt, flames dimming to embers. He hadn't prayed in years, didn't expect answers now. What he felt instead was a balance. Judgment wasn't just punishment, it was consequence, and consequence could be delayed, strategic. When Johnny rose, the fire burned steady again. The next hit was bolder. A Vought black site beneath a pharmaceutical plant, Temp V testing, unregistered subjects, soups who didn't survive the trials dumped like waste. The boys handled extraction. Johnny handled deterrence. The facility burned, not in chaos, but in lines. Power grids fried, doors melted open, chains shattered containment cells. Johnny moved through it like an executioner holding back the blade, marking souls instead of ending them. The handlers ran. The soups didn't. By the time Homelander arrived, the site was already collapsing, smoke rising in a column visible for miles. Johnny stood at the center, flames roaring, power finally unleashed, but directed. Homelander landed hard. "You think this scares me?" Johnny turned, eyes blazing brighter than before. It should. For a heartbeat, Homelander felt it again, that pressure, that sense of being seen. He lasered the ground at Johnny's feet instead, tearing the floor open, forcing distance. Cowardice disguised as control. Johnny didn't chase. He let the building fall, rode out through the firestorm, leaving behind a ruin Vought couldn't quietly erase. Across the city, executives panicked, investors called, politicians demanded answers. Vought's stock dipped for the first time in years. Stan Edgar watched it all, expression unreadable. "He's learning," he said softly, "and that makes him dangerous." The boys regrouped at dawn, exhausted, shaken, alive. "We're pushing him, hard," Huey said. "And they're pushing back," nodded. Johnny stood apart, fire low but steady. "This can't go on forever." Butcher looked at him. "Never does." In the distance, sirens wailed, soups mobilized, and far above it all, Homelander hovered alone, hands trembling, not with fear anymore, but with anticipation. If judgment wouldn't come all at once, then war would.
War didn't begin with an announcement. It never did. It started with disappearances. Low-level soups vanished first. One's Vought couldn't protect publicly, couldn't afford to lose quietly either. Then handlers, then accountants, people whose guilt wasn't cinematic, just cumulative. Each disappearance left a residue Johnny could feel like an echo in his skull. The spirit cataloged them, tallied sins, waited. Vought responded by hardening everything. Facilities were warded now, not just with tech, but belief. Corporate ritual dressed up as psychological anchoring. Employees recited mission statements like prayers. Soups were coached daily, drilled to externalize blame. It wasn't you, it was the market, the orders, the metrics. Johnny felt the effect immediately. Judgment didn't vanish, but it dulled. Sins diffused across systems, harder to localize, harder to burn cleanly. "That's new," Frenchie muttered, staring at readings spiking and dropping erratically. "They are spreading the guilt." Clenched his jaw. "So nobody feels responsible." Johnny said nothing. His flames burned lower than they had in days. Homelander took advantage. He went loud. A live-streamed takedown in Chicago, a supposed writer cult, actors, paid and disposable, rounded up and executed mid-broadcast. Homelander smiled into the camera,
blood on his face, daring the devil to interrupt. Johnny watched from a rooftop 3 states away. The spirit screamed. He could reach him. He knew it. The pull was there, strong and intoxicating. One ride, one look, one stare. Homelander's guilt would detonate like a star, and the world would watch its god fall screaming. But millions would feel the backlash. Soups tied to him, civilians wrapped in the mythology. The blast radius wasn't physical, it was existential. Johnny turned away. That choice cost him. The backlash hit hours later, internal, violent. Flames surged uncontrollably, pain ripping through him as the spirit rebelled. Johnny collapsed inside a derelict train depot, fire licking the walls, chain rattling wildly. He was losing balance. Butcher arrived first, gun raised, then lowered when he saw Johnny on one knee. "You all right?" No, and that's the problem. The spirit wanted absolutes, burn or spare. Johnny kept choosing between. This universe punished hesitation. Vought struck while he was weakened. The Temp V juggernauts, sonic disruptors calibrated from earlier encounters, runes etched deeper now, sloppier but more aggressive. The first hit slammed Johnny through a freight car, hellfire sputtering violently. This time, it wasn't interference alone, it was drain. Johnny felt it, power siphoned off, bled into containment coils, humming with stolen hell symbols. The spirit shrieked, furious, thrashing. Johnny stood, barely, flames reduced to a dull, angry red. One of the juggernauts laughed. "He's just a thing." Johnny grabbed him by the throat and stared. The penance stare tigered, but only partially. Memories flooded, guilt surged, then dispersed, fractured across conditioning and chemical suppression. The man collapsed screaming, alive, mind shattered, but soul unburned. Johnny staggered back. Homelander landed behind the team, boots crunching metal. "See," he said calmly, "you're not inevitable." He didn't attack, he didn't need to. He just watched as the team retreated, containment data secured, victory claimed without a single punch thrown. Homelander leaned in close. "You hesitate," he whispered. "That's why you'll lose." Johnny met his gaze, flyer flickering dangerously. "No," he said, "that's why you're afraid." Homelander smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He lifted off, leaving Johnny amid wreckage and smoke. The boys pulled Johnny out before the next wave could arrive. They regrouped underground, lights low, tension high. Frenchie paced, Huey looked sick, sat silently, fists clenched. "They can hurt you now, really hurt you," Huey said. Johnny nodded. "I know. But you're still holding back," Butcher said. Not accusing, observing. Johnny looked at him. "If I stop, I become what they say I am." Silence. Kimiko stepped forward. She placed a hand on Johnny's arm. Flames didn't burn her. They never did. She looked at him, eyes steady. She pointed upward, then drew a circle around her heart, then shook her head. Johnny understood. Judgment without humanity was annihilation. Humanity without judgment was rot. Balance wasn't restraint alone. It was timing. Johnny stood, fire stabilizing, not brighter, but denser, controlled, focused. "They think they've mapped my limits. They haven't." Butcher's smile was slow and sharp. "So what now?" Johnny's skull ignited, flames roaring with renewed intent. "Now," he said, "we make them choose." Above them, Homelander listened to reports, confidence creeping back into his voice. He didn't realize the devil wasn't retreating. He was setting the board.
Vought's strength had always been narrative, not power. Power could be challenged. Narrative shaped reality. It told people who the heroes were, who the villains were, and most importantly, who was allowed to judge. That's why Stan Edgar didn't order another frontal assault. That's why Homelander was told to wait. The trap was quieter. Across the country, Vought began leaking stories, carefully curated, survivors of rider attacks, half-true testimonies, a mother sobbing on camera about a brother who'd changed after Compound V, now catatonic and screaming at night. Lawyers framed it as torture, psych experts called it psychological terrorism. They never showed what those men had done. Johnny felt it immediately, the weight of misdirected guilt. Public fear didn't weaken him directly, but it distorted the spirit's senses. The innocent's terror layered over the guilty like fog. Judgment blurred. Targets overlapped. That was the point. Butcher slammed a fist on the table when the broadcasts hit. They're turning you into the boogeyman. Johnny stared at the screen, flames low. I already am. No, Huey said quietly. You're letting them decide what that means. Before Johnny could answer, Frenchie's monitor spiked. We have movement, he said. Big. Stadium big. Vought wasn't hiding anymore. Stadium Field, Chicago. A unity rally. Soups, flags, patriotic chants. Homelander front and center, smiling like salvation. The message was blunt. Come here, in front of everyone. Johnny felt the pull like a hook in his spine. This is it, said. They want you on their terms. They want me to burn in public. Or worse, lose control. Johnny rode anyway. The sky over Chicago darkened unnaturally as he approached, clouds thickening, thunder rolling without rain. Helicopters circled the stadium, drones swarmed like insects. Inside, tens of thousands cheered as Homelander raised his arms, basking in worship. Then the flames appeared at the far end of the field. Panic rippled through the crowd. Security scrambled. Homelander's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. This was the moment he'd rehearsed. Johnny rolled onto the grass, engine roaring, hellfire contained but potent. He could feel everything at once, guilt concentrated on the stage, fear radiating from the stands, cameras amplifying it all. This was dangerous. Homelander floated down, arms wide. See, he boomed, he comes when we call him. Johnny dismounted slowly. You brought them. You used them. They chose to be here, just like you chose to terrorize my world. Johnny felt the spirits surge, screaming for release. One full stare at Homelander here would ripple outward, collateral judgment, psychic backlash, thousands scarred. That was the choice. Homelander leaned closer, lowering his voice. Do it, he whispered. Prove me right. Johnny looked past him, to the crowd. Families, kids with capes, innocents wrapped in lies. He made his decision. Johnny turned away from Homelander and drove straight up the stage. Chains erupted, not at the hero, but at the infrastructure. Lights shattered, screens exploded, sound systems died in a cascade of sparks. The narrative collapsed mid-sentence. Homelander shouted, furious, "Look at me!" Johnny didn't. He rode the length of the stadium, hellfire carving a blazing sigil on the turf, a mark that burned without heat. Not punishment, warning. Then he faced the crowd. His voice carried without amplification. You've been taught that monsters look like me, but monsters hide behind smiles. Silence. Homelander lunged. Johnny reacted instantly, not with judgment, but force. The chain wrapped around Homelander mid-air, slamming him into the field hard enough to crater it. Gasps tore through the stands. Cameras caught everything. Johnny stood over him, flames roaring, power fully present but restrained to a razor edge. Not here, Johnny said. Not with them watching. Homelander stared up at him stunned, not by pain, but by denial. He was being refused the center of the story. Johnny released him and mounted the bike. As he rode away, the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't scream.
They watched, and somewhere in that silence, something fundamental cracked. Back in New York, Stan Edgar watched the feed cut to static. For the first time, his composure slipped. "He's rewriting the narrative," Edgar said softly. Homelander rose from the crater, shaking with rage, eyes wet, not from pain, but from humiliation. He'd been challenged without being crowned martyr or victor. He'd been exposed. And worse, he couldn't retaliate without proving the devil right. Johnny rode into the storm beyond the stadium, flames steady, balance intact. He hadn't won, but he'd forced the world to hesitate. And for Vought, hesitation was the beginning of collapse.
The weeks that followed were a tense, simmering chess match. Vought's influence persisted, but the cracks were visible now. Boardrooms whispered, investors hesitated. Soups were anxious, their arrogance tempered by the knowledge that someone, something, was watching, calculating, judging. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, aware of the flame that had passed through. Johnny Blaze didn't ride recklessly anymore. Every action was measured. The spirit of vengeance was a coiled storm inside him, constantly testing the limits, demanding release. But Johnny had learned patience. Judgment was no longer instantaneous. It was strategic, surgical, precise. The boys moved in tandem with him, but always at a safe distance. They gathered intelligence, lured minor soups into situations where consequences could be felt without catastrophic collateral damage, and allowed Johnny to teach them the edge between terror and restraint. Homelander, meanwhile, was enraged and increasingly erratic. Publicly, he maintained the persona of America's protector. Privately, he stalked the streets at night, hunting the flaming rider who had humiliated him, whose existence had proven that fear didn't bow to fame or power. The tipping point came when Vought deployed a new weapon, the Temp V hybrid, enhanced with experimental mystical damping circuits. This team was designed specifically to neutralize Ghost Rider, blending raw suit power with stolen dark technology. Johnny sensed them almost immediately. He wasn't just tracking sins anymore. He was sensing intent, plans, and fear. The ambush was set in a derelict steel mill on the outskirts of Chicago. Smoke coils twisted from broken furnaces, rusted girders cast jagged shadows in the dying sunlight. The rider's enemies waited silently, confidence radiating off them in waves. They didn't understand the storm that was coming. Johnny stepped onto the metal floor, flames burning low, chains coiled like serpents at his sides. He felt the spirit surge, whispering that restraint was no longer an option, but he hesitated. The hybrid soldiers were enhanced enough to survive his raw judgment, and civilians were scattered in nearby warehouses. He couldn't risk collateral damage. The first strike came instantly. A Temp V enhanced brute, charged, fists blazing with energy designed to mimic hellfire. Johnny met him mid-run, chains snapping around the soup, channeling heat and energy in a blinding flash. Sparks erupted, flesh and tech collided, but the penance stare was the true weapon. Memories flooded the hybrid. Every corrupted experiment, every abuse, every sanctioned murder, compressed into the seconds it took to fall. The brute convulsed violently, but survived, scorched but alive, shaking in existential torment. The rest of the team attacked in waves, combining strategy and power, but Johnny was relentless. Each blow was countered, each trap dismantled before it triggered. The spirit roared, demanding complete annihilation, but Johnny held it back, choosing precision over wrath. Then Homelander arrived. The air trembled as he landed atop a rusted catwalk, cape snapping like a predator's tail. "Thought you could play with my toys?" he hissed, eyes glowing red. Johnny didn't answer. He revved the bike and drove forward, chains lashing out, igniting everything in a controlled firestorm. Homelander met the attack head-on. Collisions rang like gunfire through the mill, sending steel beams trembling. They fought not just for dominance, but for principle. Homelander relied on brute strength, intimidation, and raw Vought conditioning. Johnny relied on skill, strategy, and the spirit's judgment. Neither was willing to yield. Hours later, the mill was in ruins. The Temp V hybrids were incapacitated or retreating. Homelander hovered, exhausted, humiliated, yet unbroken. Johnny stood at the center, flames burning steady but contained, chains still coiled and ready. "You can't stop me," Homelander said, chest heaving. "I don't need to stop you. I just need you to remember who can." The spirit of vengeance pulsed, not with anger, but with patient menace. Homelander didn't blink. For the first time, he understood what fear really was. Not the fear of death, not the fear of pain, but the fear of judgment that saw everything. The battle ended, but the war had changed. Vought retreated. Supes reconsidered their actions. The boys regrouped, hearts racing but spirits emboldened. And Johnny Blaze rode on, flames dimmed, chains coiled, knowing that the consequences of his presence would ripple across this world for years. For once, judgment was deliberate, precise, human, and the spirit of vengeance waited, patient, for the next reckoning.
The city had changed. Chicago no longer celebrated Homelander's staged heroics with unthinking awe. Rumors of the Ghost Rider spread like wildfire through underground networks, whispered among civilians and supes alike. In offices behind closed doors, Vought executives muttered names they hadn't dared speak aloud. Johnny Blaze, Spirit of Vengeance, the demon who refused to kill indiscriminately but punished the guilty with surgical precision. For Johnny, the streets felt different. The ambient guilt was heavier, more concentrated. He could sense the careful lies woven into the infrastructure: insurance fraud, cover-ups, blackmail, and exploitation. The spirit of vengeance urged him to strike, to purge, to scorch. But Johnny had learned patience. Each flame needed focus, each chain strike measured. The world wasn't black and white here. It was a spectrum, and he had to judge accordingly. Vought wasn't done. They began their next attempt: subtle manipulation. Rumors of a supernatural threat were leaked in media outlets controlled by the corporation. Panic spread. The public, conditioned to worship their heroes, now whispered about a demon who judged them from the shadows. Supply chains, financial systems, and public morale were all destabilized, not by destruction, but by fear. Then came the morally complex choice: a Vought compound deep in the Rockies, a research facility where supes were being created, experimented on, and discarded. Inside, innocent young test subjects were kept alive, human lives caught in a system built to profit from cruelty. The spirit of vengeance howled for intervention. Destroy the compound, burn the guilty, end the experiments. But the children would die. Johnny hesitated. The spirit pressed. "They suffer. You are needed." Johnny's hand clenched on the chain. Flames licked at the floor. "Not today," he said, voice gravelly. "Not like this." Instead, he devised a precise strike: disable containment systems, liberate the innocents, and punish only the architects, the scientists, the directors, the enforcers who had consented to the atrocities. The chain flew like a serpent, dismantling security systems, sparking alarms, igniting hellfire around the guilty without harming the children.
Vought operatives tried to intervene, Supes trained in combat, armed with enhanced technology, but Johnny was relentless. Each attack was countered with strategy, each sin catalogued, each punishment exacted. They fell one by one, screaming, shaken to their core by the penance stare. Pain without death, judgment without overkill, a perfect balance. Then Homelander arrived. His flight was silent, predatory, and he hovered above the chaos with a red glare that could ignite panic in the most hardened veteran. "You think you can walk into my world and do this?" he said. "I protect the innocent. I am their god." Johnny faced him, chains coiled, flames blazing. "You protect the innocent from what? Yourself? From me? No, you profit from them, and that makes you guilty." Homelander surged downward, fists ready to strike. Johnny braced, but instead of meeting aggression with aggression, he forced Homelander into a penance stare. Not full strength, but enough to expose the weight of his arrogance, the countless lives destroyed, the silent guilt he refused to feel. Homelander convulsed, eyes wide, voice breaking for the first time in decades. The public, watching through cameras, saw nothing but a flawless hero. But Johnny knew the truth. The battle ended without casualties among the innocent. The guilty were marked, tormented, and reminded that even those who seemed untouchable had consequences. Johnny mounted his bike, flames calm but vigilant, and rode away, leaving Homelander shaken on the frozen ground. The Ghost Rider had made his statement. Judgment was real, and this world had no choice but to respect it.
The final confrontation wasn't announced. There were no billboards, no live feeds, no rallies. It came quietly, an inevitable collision of power, will, and principle. Homelander had learned, begrudgingly, that Johnny Blaze could not be dominated by force alone. He couldn't be shattered by threats, media spin, or corporate authority. Every attempt to control him, every attack, had only sharpened the rider's judgment, and the spirit of vengeance, patient and relentless, now pulsed with a singular clarity. One last reckoning was necessary to reset the scales. The location was a derelict industrial island outside New York, abandoned before Vought ever existed. Shipping containers stacked like silent witnesses, rusted cranes arched against the night sky. The air was thick with fog, the smell of salt water and rust. This was ground neither Supe nor Spirit had fully claimed, a neutral arena where both would meet without endangering civilians. Homelander hovered, cape fluttering like a specter. He radiated controlled rage, ego, and the desperate need to dominate. "This ends tonight," he said, voice low, almost personal. "No distractions, no civilians, just you and me." Johnny stepped off the bike, skull aflame, chains rattling in anticipation. The spirit surged inside him, whispering in ancient tones, asking, demanding, "Judge without mercy." Johnny nodded, recognizing the gravity. He wouldn't destroy Homelander, but he would expose him fully. The battle erupted. They clashed with unstoppable force. Fists collided, sending shockwaves through steel and air. Chains wrapped around limbs, repelling, deflecting, striking with precision. Hellfire met laser vision in explosive collisions that lit the fog like miniature suns. Each strike was a message. Homelander's brute strength against Blaze's strategic judgment. Raw ego against controlled vengeance. The spirit pressed, urging total obliteration, but Johnny restrained it. He was 100% aware of his power and its consequences. Every maneuver targeted only Homelander's guilt, arrogance, in the sins he had inflicted upon the innocent. Each pulse of hellfire seared memory, not flesh. Each stare twisted perception, forcing Homelander to see the cumulative weight of his actions. Finally, Johnny chained him mid-air, hoisting him above the crumbling dock. The penance stare intensified. Homelander's eyes widened as decades of arrogance, cruelty, and unchecked power were poured back into him in an unrelenting flood. For the first time, he felt fear. Not fear of death, but of truth. He gasped, voice cracking, "I am their protector." Johnny's flames flared higher. A protector hides nothing. You exploit, you destroy, you profit, and now you feel it. Minutes or lifetimes passed. When Homelander fell to the ground, shaken but alive, Johnny stepped back. The spirit roared in frustration, but Johnny calmed it with a single thought: mercy tempered by judgment, consequences meted without annihilation. The world watched in fragments, cameras, satellites, leaks, but none captured the full truth. What was recorded was a hero's fall, a demon's presence, and the faintest hint that justice could be deliberate, precise, and terrifying. The boys emerged from the shadows, exhausted but alive. Butcher exhaled smoke, eyes gleaming with respect. You did it," he muttered. Johnny wiped soot from his skull. "I didn't win. I reminded them they're not untouchable. That's enough for now." Homelander, bloodied but breathing, watched the rider ride away. His empire wasn't shattered, but it had cracked. He knew he had limits now, and that knowledge burned brighter than any Compound V-enhanced power. The spirit pulsed one last time, whispering in satisfaction as Johnny disappeared into the night, leaving a world shaken, fearful, and fundamentally changed. The balance had been restored, not through death, but through revelation, strategy, and unrelenting moral clarity.
The clash between Ghost Rider and the world of the boys ended not with total destruction, but with a profound shift in the balance of power. Johnny Blaze did not annihilate the guilty, nor did he allow innocence to suffer. Instead, he wielded judgment with precision, teaching both supes and humans that accountability was inescapable, even in a universe fueled by manipulation, greed, and unchecked power. Homelander, once untouchable, now understood fear, not of death, but of the truth of his own sins. Vought's influence remained, but cracks had formed in its carefully constructed empire, and whispers of rebellion and exposure began to circulate among those who had once bowed blindly. For Johnny, the spirit of vengeance had not been tamed, it had been disciplined. He learned that restraint, strategic judgment, and moral calculation were as powerful as flames and chains. The rider's presence in this world proved that vengeance could coexist with compassion, that judgment did not have to be absolute annihilation, and that sometimes survival itself could be the ultimate punishment. The city would never forget the flaming skull on the horizon, the chains that struck without mercy, or the lesson that even the mightiest were accountable. And somewhere in the shadows, Johnny Blaze rode on, prepared for the next reckoning, knowing his work was far from over. May the Force be with you. More stories await.